Hello and welcome to Sovereign RPG. I am Sovereign and today we are back in New World to talk about the dungeons and if they are any good, what needs to be sorted, if there are any things that Amazon Games needs to look at to make it a little bit better. So let's get straight into it. Now dungeons are pretty much a mainstay in any MMORPG. They're all over the place in every game that you can play. Right now, currently, as an MMO, they have dungeons, and the dungeons are a way to level grind, which allows the monotonous questing to sort of be broken up, so you're not sitting there just running backwards and forwards over and over again. Now the dungeons in New World are nothing different, but they are very enjoyable. I am having fun doing them. At first it was a bit rough until we sort of figured out certain mechanics. I haven't really been checking a lot of the information on the internet, watching videos, etc. Mainly because I wanted to sort of figure out some stuff by myself and figure it out with the team, because it's a lot more fun to do it that way than it is to find out all the information of everything that you need to do. So we started doing the first dungeons around about level 20. That's when you can start getting in there. You do get a quest at level 20 that's part of the main quest. So if you're not doing the main quest, make sure you're doing that and keeping up with your level, because it does unlock certain mechanics in the game. It unlocks being able to do the corruption sites when you get the Azov staff, and you get the crafting recipe to be able to enter the dungeon. Now this does require a crafted item to actually open the dungeon. At least one of the players in the group has to have that. Not everyone, just one of the players. My main issue with the dungeons when you finally get in there is the fact that the mobs almost give 0 XP. It's really bad, especially if you want to be leveling through dungeons and not doing any of the sort of back and forth questing that I was talking about earlier. They give very small amounts, and very small amounts of your actual weapon mastery XP as well. I see the dungeons in New World more of an item grind, to be able to farm up some items, some weapons, some armor that are better than the ones you're currently wearing to be able to continue forward. Everything in New World is very gear dependent. When you start falling back in, say, your damage or your specific stat that you need for your damage, you'll really notice that you start having trouble with certain mobs in certain areas. So doing a couple of the dungeons, getting a couple of T3 loot, especially when you're doing the first dungeon at 20, which is actually, should be really done at 25, but it's not too difficult between 20 and 25, especially if you have a healer. If you don't have a healer, it's a bit of a nightmare. If you have players that don't really know how to use the dodging system, it's a very much needed skill in the dungeons to be able to dodge out of the way of certain abilities, but it makes it a lot more active in the combat. Now I wasn't a fan of the combat during doing the quests and running around doing all that back and forth monotonous stuff, but that's mainly because I was bored of the questing, so it just made the combat feel a little bit bad. But in the dungeons, the combat does feel a hell of a lot better. And who doesn't want to actually play with other people in an MMO, a game that's designed to be played with other people? There was something that I did notice when I was going through the dungeons. When I started going over them at like level 20, I was only really getting green tier 3s. And it was a small upgrade from the level 15 greens that you get from the Covenant Quartermaster. But once you start putting on those tier 3 greens, even the lowest level ones, you can really see a massive difference in the amount of damage output you have, the amount of stuff you can tank. So it is actually really nice. Once you get to like 23, 24, 25, you'll start realizing that you get a lot more blue drops. When I hit 25, even in the open world, it was quite weird because I started getting a lot more blue drops. I started getting a lot more tier 3 drops. Whereas before, it felt like I wasn't really getting anything. So I'm not sure if there's a mechanic in the game that's sort of when you get closer to a level that is supposed to be for that area you're in or for the dungeon that you're doing, you actually get better loot. I don't know if that's a thing that they did or an actual mechanic in there. I can't confirm that because I can only go past a certain level once, and I'm not going to be starting up another character because it is a nightmare to level in this game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I do prefer a little bit of difficulty in my MMOs rather than just running around with maximum mana at all times like in World of Warcraft, being able to one-shot most things, and it's a lot more active. So when you get to the actual bosses in the dungeons themselves, they do have mechanics. They're very basic mechanics, and there are some issues with the placement of the ground target. So it will show you a sort of animation, like in this boss that I'll probably be showing in the background right now. It drops steel chains in a purple circle. Now, when those purple chains actually drop, you've got a couple of seconds to get out of them because you'll be stunned and held in place, and then all these spirits will come out and start doing some AoE damage. As you can see in the background footage, I was jumping out of these purple chains, but I was still being hit by these actual spirits themselves, which is part of the AoE, which you're supposed to get away with if you're outside the purple chains, but there seems to be an issue there. Maybe it's something to do with latency or server lag because I'm playing on the American servers, but I have heard, mainly because I'm playing with a lot of other Americans, and those Americans have said the same thing. It is an issue sometimes, not all the time, just sometimes. There are sort of different levels of mobs, so you have your standard stuff. They're a little bit more elite than what you have in the outside world. And then you have the silver mobs, which you do have in the outside world as well, that are a bit more difficult, certain named mobs and bosses. And they actually have mechanics themselves. They have stuns, AoEs, charges, etc. Then you have the gold mobs, which have a lot more HP. They have a lot more damage. They do have slightly more mechanics. They can have multiple mechanics. And then you have your named gold mobs, which are the bosses. They have your ground targets, the charges, stuns, debuffs, and certain other mechanics, like the final boss in the first dungeon, where he actually, if you see, the strategy we have for the last boss is to just have one person have all the aggro of the ads and just run around in circles while everyone else targets the boss, and whoever has the boss aggro actually runs around and kites that boss, with the healers throwing up their fortifiers and their AoEs. But the mechanic on that boss is that if you leave those guys alive for too long, then he will actually eat those and heal. Now, it wasn't too much of an issue for us. It does add some time to the actual killing of the boss, but it wasn't a heal enough for it to actually make a massive difference. It's nice to see that they've already got pretty decent boss mechanics in the early iteration of the dungeons. They haven't been out that long, and there's definitely room for them to be able to work on some stuff. But at the moment, they're looking pretty good on a basic level. I'm still enjoying them. It's not something that you can farm XP over and over again. There is a repeatable quest that you get from a dog outside called Barkamedes, which they get points for on that name. Just alone, that name on by itself. They have a lot of room to improve, and it will be something that they'll be looking at in the future. Now we're almost at level 30, so we're going to be sort of jumping into the next dungeon here pretty soon, so we'll be able to see the mechanics of the next one, if we can get into it. Now the tanking in the dungeons is a bit of a nightmare, because you do require a gem that is put into your gear that allows you to be able to sort of, not taunt mobs, because there is no real taunt in the game. It allows you to have more aggro when you're actually doing damage, so you get more threat. And there are other gems that you can get into gear, that you can slot into gear, that give you less threat when you're actually healing and doing DPS. So this is going to be something you're going to be wanting to look at when you're actually doing the dungeons, especially at the later levels where they maybe become a bit harder. These gems are going to be what you wanted to look for to actually slot into the gear. And that's pretty much all we know about the dungeons so far. Well, all I know about the dungeons so far. My experiences, my actual impressions on what it is. These might not be the same impressions that a lot of other people have. And from my last video, they've done really well, by the way. That is it really that good video. I'm really happy with the amount of interaction. I'm really happy with you guys giving your opinions and your answers. But a lot of people were upset saying that it was just a lot of my personal opinions. Well, obviously it's my personal opinions, because this is my actual personal YouTube channel where I give my opinions on stuff. Shock horror. A little bit of salt there for you. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. Make sure to look out for more New World content. Different guides will be coming out, etc. Leveling guides, farming gold guides, farming as of guides, and having a further look into other mechanics in the game. I want to thank you all for watching. Remember to like and sub if you haven't already. Fly safe and avoid local chat scams.